The moment I saw the orange parking cone blocking my driveway that Tuesday morning in Phoenix, Arizona, I knew my life was about to become a nightmare. I had been planning this for months. My small business selling vintage car parts online had finally grown enough that I needed proper storage, and a 20-foot shipping container was the perfect solution. The delivery was scheduled for 10 in the morning, and I had spent the previous evening clearing my driveway and making sure everything was ready. My property at 4127 Saguaro Ridge Drive had plenty of space on the side yard, and I had checked every single HOA regulation 3 times to make sure I was in compliance. The container would sit behind my fence line, completely out of view from the street. I had submitted the required forms to the Sunset Valley HOA 6 weeks prior and received written approval. Everything was legal, documented, and ready to go, except someone had placed 3 orange traffic cones across my driveway entrance at 7 in the morning. I walked down my driveway in my work boots and jeans, coffee still in hand, and examined the cones. They were not mine. I lived alone, had no wife or kids, and I certainly had not put them there. I picked one up and looked around the quiet suburban street. Most of my neighbors had already left for work. The Arizona sun was already heating up the pavement, promising another scorcher of a day. That was when I heard the voice that would haunt my next few weeks. "Excuse me. Those are there for a reason." I turned to see a woman storming across her perfectly manicured lawn from 3 houses down. She was in her late 40s, with that specific haircut that suburban moms get when they want to speak to managers. Blonde highlights, angular layers, the works. She wore white capris and a turquoise blouse that probably cost more than my monthly water bill. "Sorry, who are you?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "I am Deborah Klein, the vice president of the Sunset Valley HOA board, and you cannot have a commercial delivery blocking our street today." She said this while standing in the middle of the road, hands on her hips, as if she owned the entire neighborhood. "The delivery is scheduled and approved," I said. "I have all the paperwork. The container is going in my side yard behind my fence. It will not be visible from the street." "I reviewed the request again this morning and I am denying it," Deborah said. "Commercial storage containers are not appropriate for our community aesthetic." I stared at her. "You approved it 6 weeks ago. I have your signature on the form." "That was before I fully understood what you were planning," she said, her voice rising. "I drive past your house every day, and I have seen all those car parts you have been accumulating. This is a residential neighborhood, not a junkyard." My jaw tightened. I ran a legitimate business. I sold vintage automotive parts to collectors and restoration shops across the country. Everything was properly registered. I paid my taxes, and I worked from home like thousands of other Americans. The parts I had were neatly organized in my garage and basement, and nothing was visible from outside my property. "The approval is in writing," I said slowly. "The container will be behind my fence, completely out of sight. You cannot just change your mind on the day of delivery." "Watch me," Deborah said. "Those cones stay there. If a delivery truck blocks this street, I will call the city and have it towed." "You cannot tow a delivery truck for making a legitimate delivery," I said. "Try me, Xavier," she said, using my first name with a sneer that made it sound like an insult. My full name was Xavier Zimmerman, and I had lived in this neighborhood for 3 years without any problems until now. Deborah turned and walked back to her house, leaving me standing there with a traffic cone in my hand and my blood pressure rising. I went back inside and pulled out all my paperwork. The HOA approval form was signed by Deborah Klein and the HOA president. A retired accountant named Gary who barely paid attention to anything. The form clearly stated that I could install a storage container with the specifications I had provided. 20 feet long, 8 feet wide, standard height, to be placed in the side yard behind the existing fence line, painted to match the fence color within 30 days of installation. Everything was in order. She had no legal right to block this. I called the delivery company to explain the situation. They were surprisingly understanding but made it clear they could not wait around long. The driver would attempt delivery at 10, and if the driveway was blocked, they would have to reschedule, which would cost me an additional $400. At 9:30, I went back outside and moved the cones to the side of the street. Within 5 minutes, Deborah was back, and she was not alone. She had brought 2 other women from the neighborhood, both of whom I recognized from HOA meetings but had never actually spoken to. "You cannot remove those cones," Deborah said, immediately replacing them across my driveway. "This is my property," I said. "You cannot block my driveway." "This is HOA common area," she said, gesturing to the street. "And as vice president, I have the authority to manage traffic flow." "The street belongs to the city of Phoenix," I said. "You have zero authority here." One of the other women, a brunette in yoga pants, spoke up. "Deborah is just trying to protect our property values. Nobody wants to live next to a business." "I live here," I said. "I work from home. That is completely legal." "Not when it affects the rest of us," the third woman added. I realized this was not about rules or regulations. This was about Deborah flexing her power, and she had recruited backup to make sure I knew who was in charge. The delivery truck arrived at exactly 10 a.m. It was a large flatbed truck with the shipping container already loaded, and it needed to back into my driveway to unload the container using its hydraulic lift system. The driver, a Hispanic guy in his 30s named Miguel, climbed out and assessed the situation immediately. "Those your cones?" he asked me. "No, they are not," I said. Deborah rushed over before I could explain further. "This delivery is not authorized. You need to leave immediately." Miguel looked at her, then at me. "Sir, is this your property?" "Yes, it is," I said. "I have all the permits and HOA approval." "She is trying to block it illegally." Miguel pulled out his phone and made a call to his supervisor. While he talked, Deborah called someone too. Within 15 minutes, we had quite a scene developing on Saguaro Ridge Drive. A Phoenix police cruiser pulled up first, which surprised me because I had not expected Deborah to actually call the cops. Officer Martinez stepped out and immediately asked what was going on. Deborah jumped in before I could speak. "This man is trying to have a commercial delivery in a residential neighborhood without proper authorization." "That is not true," I said, pulling out my paperwork. "I have HOA approval and this is my private property." Officer Martinez reviewed my documents while Deborah continued to talk over everyone. He looked tired, like this was not the first HOA dispute he had dealt with, and it would not be the last. "Madam, he has approval in writing," Officer Martinez said. "You cannot block his driveway." "I am the HOA vice president and I am telling you this violates our covenants," Deborah insisted. "That is a civil matter," the officer said, "but blocking someone's driveway is actually a violation of city code. I need you to remove those cones." Deborah's face turned red. "I will not. This is about protecting our community." "Madam, if you do not remove those cones, I can cite you for obstruction," Officer Martinez said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Deborah looked like she was about to explode, but she grabbed the cones and threw them onto her own lawn. "Fine. But this is not over. I will be filing a complaint with the HOA board and we will fine you into bankruptcy." Officer Martinez looked at me. "Sir, you are clear to proceed with your delivery. "Madam, I suggest you go inside and let this man conduct his business legally." Deborah stormed off, pulling out her phone again. The two other women followed her, shooting me dirty looks as they went. Miguel backed his truck into my driveway, and we started the process of unloading the container. It took about 45 minutes to position it exactly where I wanted it in my side yard. The whole time, I could see Deborah watching from her window 3 houses down. Once the container was in place and Miguel had left, I felt like I could finally breathe. I had won this round, but something told me Deborah was not done. People like her never were. I was right. The next morning, I found a notice stuck to my front door. It was an official HOA violation letter, claiming that I had installed a structure without proper approval and was in violation of Section 12.7 of the Community Covenants. The fine was $500, with an additional $50 per day until the container was removed. I could not believe what I was reading. I had the approval in writing. This was pure retaliation. I spent that afternoon documenting everything. I took photos of the container from every angle, showing how it was completely hidden behind my fence. I made copies of all my approval paperwork. I researched Arizona HOA law and discovered that HOAs cannot issue fines without following proper procedure, which includes a hearing and an opportunity to dispute the charges. I sent a certified letter to the HOA board, demanding a hearing and pointing out that Deborah had approved my request in writing. I also sent a copy to every board member individually, bypassing Deborah entirely. 3 days later, I received a response. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 p.m. at the community center. I would have 15 minutes to present my case. In the meantime, Deborah escalated things in petty ways. She filed a complaint with the city, claiming I was running an illegal business. An inspector came out, looked at my setup, reviewed my business license and home occupation permit, and told me everything was fine. She filed a complaint with the fire department, claiming my container was a fire hazard. They came out, inspected it, and found nothing wrong. She even tried to get my neighbors to sign a petition against me. Out of the 32 homes on our street, she managed to get 8 signatures, mostly from people who barely knew what they were signing. The Thursday hearing arrived, and I showed up at the community center with a folder full of documentation. The board consisted of 5 people: Gary, the president, Deborah, the vice president, and 3 other members I barely knew. Gary opened the meeting and explained that we were there to discuss the violation notice issued to my property. I presented my case clearly and calmly. I showed the approval form with Deborah's signature. I showed photos proving the container was not visible from the street. I showed my business license and home occupation permit. I pointed out that Deborah had approved the exact same container she was now trying to fine me for. "Mr. Zimmerman," Deborah said when I finished, "the issue is not whether you have permits. The issue is that you deceived the board about the nature of your business and the impact on our community." "I did not deceive anyone," I said. "My application was completely honest about what I was installing and why." "You failed to disclose that you were operating a commercial enterprise that would attract large delivery trucks and create traffic problems," she said. "One delivery truck, one time," I said, "and you tried to block it illegally. I was protecting the community from your disruption." Deborah said, her voice rising. Gary tried to calm things down. "Look, Xavier, maybe we can work out a compromise here. What if you agree to move the container somewhere else and we waive the fines?" "Why would I move it?" I asked. "It is exactly where your approval form says it should be. Behind my fence, out of sight." "But it is bothering Deborah," one of the other board members said, a woman in her 60s named Patricia. It is not visible from her house, I said. She lives 3 houses down. There is no way she can even see it. That is not the point, Deborah said. The point is that you are lowering property values with your junkyard business. I restore and sell vintage car parts, I said. Everything is stored neatly and legally, and you approved it in writing. The board deliberated for 20 minutes while I sat outside the room. When they called me back in, Gary looked uncomfortable. We have decided to uphold the fine, he said. You have 30 days to remove the container or face additional penalties. I could not believe it. You are upholding a fine for something you approved in writing. The board has the right to revoke approval if circumstances change, Deborah said with a satisfied smile. What circumstances changed? I demanded. Community sentiment, she said. We have a petition with 8 signatures expressing concern about your business. 8 signatures out of 150 homes, I said. That is not community sentiment. That is you abusing your power. The decision is final, Gary said. Meeting adjourned. I left that community center knowing I had 2 options. Pay the fine and remove the container, losing thousands of dollars in the process, or fight this in court. Neither option was appealing, but I was not about to let Deborah bully me into submission. The next morning, I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Michelle Torres, and her office was in Scottsdale. She reviewed my documentation and shook her head. This is textbook HOA abuse, she said. You have approval in writing and they are retroactively denying it. That is not legal in Arizona. Can we fight it? I asked. Absolutely, she said. But litigation is expensive. We are looking at probably $10,000 to $15,000 in legal fees, and it could take 6 to 8 months. My stomach dropped. I did not have that kind of money to throw at a legal battle, especially when my business was just starting to take off. What if I just refuse to pay the fines? I asked. They can put a lien on your house, Michelle said. Eventually, they could even foreclose if the amount gets high enough. HOAs have a surprising amount of power in Arizona. I left her office feeling defeated. Deborah had me in a corner and she knew it, but then something unexpected happened. 2 days after the hearing, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. Is this Xavier Zimmerman? A man's voice asked. Yes, who is this? My name is Ross. I drive for Phoenix Towing. I heard you are having some trouble with Deborah Klein. I paused. How did you hear about that? Small world, Ross said. Look, I know this is weird, but can we meet for coffee? There is something you should know about Deborah, and it might help your situation. My curiosity was definitely piqued. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near downtown Phoenix the next morning. Ross turned out to be a guy in his early 50s, built like someone who had done physical work his whole life. He had gray in his beard and tired eyes that suggested he had seen plenty of life's complications. Thanks for meeting me, he said as we sat down with our coffees. I know this is strange, but when I heard about what Deborah was doing to you, I felt like I had to reach out. How do you know about it? I asked. I have a buddy who lives in your neighborhood, Ross said. He mentioned the whole HOA fight, and when he said Deborah Klein's name, I nearly spit out my beer. That woman is my ex-wife. My eyes widened. Seriously? Unfortunately, yes, Ross said. We were married for 8 years, divorced 6 years ago. It was not pleasant. Deborah is someone who needs to control everything and everyone around her. When she could not control me anymore, she made my life hell during the divorce. That tracks with what I am experiencing, I said. Here is the thing, Ross said, leaning forward. I know Deborah better than anyone. She has a pattern. She picks a target, usually someone she perceives as beneath her, and she uses whatever power she has to make them miserable. She did it at her last neighborhood before she moved to Sunset Valley. She did it at her job before she quit to become a full-time HOA tyrant. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I am sick of her hurting people," Ross said. "And because I think I can help you. When is your next run-in with her likely to happen?" I thought about it. "Well, she has been calling the city every time I have a delivery. I have a truck coming Monday with some parts I purchased from an estate sale. Based on her pattern, she will probably try to block that too." Ross nodded slowly. "What if I told you I could make sure that does not happen?" "What do you mean?" "I work for Phoenix Towing," Ross said. "We have contracts with the city for parking enforcement and emergency towing. If Deborah tries to block your driveway again with cones or her own car, that is illegal, and I can have it towed as an obstruction." I felt a glimmer of hope. She would not park in my driveway. "No, but she might park her car across the street in a way that blocks access," Ross said. "She has done that before, and if she does, I will be there to handle it. Legally, of course." We talked for another hour. Ross explained that he was not doing this out of pure altruism. He had his own grievances with Deborah, including the fact that she had violated their divorce agreement multiple times and made it difficult for him to see his daughter during her teenage years. "My daughter is 20 now and does not talk to Deborah anymore," Ross said. "She figured out what kind of person her mother is. But for years, Deborah used her as a weapon against me. So yeah, I have some motivation to see Deborah get what is coming to her." Monday arrived, and sure enough, Deborah was ready. My parts delivery was scheduled for 11 a.m. At 10:30, I saw Deborah's white Lexus SUV parked directly across from my driveway, positioned in such a way that the delivery truck would not be able to back in properly. I had already texted Ross that morning, and he was on standby. I sent him another text. "She is here, blocking access." Ross showed up in his tow truck within 15 minutes. I watched from my porch as he parked and got out, clipboard in hand. He walked over to Deborah's Lexus and took photos from multiple angles. Deborah came rushing out of her house. "What are you doing?" "That is my car." Ross looked up, and I could see the moment Deborah recognized him. Her face went pale. "Ross, what are you doing here?" "My job," Ross said calmly. "This vehicle is parked in violation of Phoenix Municipal Code Section 28-899, blocking access to a residential driveway during a scheduled delivery." "I am not blocking anything," Deborah protested. "Madam, I have photographic evidence that shows your vehicle is preventing a delivery truck from safely accessing that driveway," Ross said, pointing to my house. "I am authorized to tow this vehicle." "You cannot do this. This is harassment." Deborah's voice was getting shrill. "This is my job," Ross repeated. "You have 5 minutes to move your vehicle before I hook it up." Several neighbors had come out to watch the scene. Deborah looked around and seemed to realize she was losing the audience. "This is because of the divorce, is not it?" she said. "You are still bitter." "This has nothing to do with our divorce," Ross said. "This is about you breaking the law." 4 minutes. Deborah stood there for another moment, clearly weighing her options. She could move the car and lose face, or she could let it get towed and pay the fees. Neither option was good for her. She moved the car. The delivery truck arrived right on time, and I received my parts without any further incident. Ross stayed until the delivery was complete, just to make sure Deborah did not try anything else. After the truck left, I walked over to where Ross was finishing up his paperwork. "Thank you," I said. "That was perfect timing." "Just doing my job," Ross said with a slight smile. "But I will admit, it felt good. Deborah has been using her position to bully people for too long." "She is not going to let this go," I said. "Probably not," Ross agreed. But now you have an ally who knows exactly how she operates. And trust me, Deborah makes mistakes when she is angry. We just need to wait for her to overplay her hand." Ross was right. Deborah did not let it go. The following week, I received another violation notice. This time, it claimed I was operating a commercial vehicle repair facility without proper zoning. The fine was $1,000. I did not repair vehicles. I sold parts. But Deborah had apparently told the HOA board that she had seen multiple cars at my house at various times, which she claimed was evidence of a repair business. The truth was much simpler. I occasionally had friends over who shared my interest in classic cars. We would hang out in my garage, talk about projects, and sometimes I would sell them parts. It was no different than any other hobby. I contested the violation immediately and requested another hearing. This time, I brought Ross as a witness. The hearing was contentious from the start. Deborah was clearly furious that Ross was there. "What is he doing here?" she demanded when we walked in. "Ross is here as a witness to the harassment I have been experiencing," I said calmly. "This is a closed HOA meeting," Deborah said. "Actually, Arizona law allows homeowners to bring witnesses to HOA hearings," Gary said, looking uncomfortable. He seemed to be realizing that this situation was spiraling out of control. I presented my case, explaining that I was not running a vehicle repair business. I showed receipts proving that any cars at my house were personal visits, not commercial transactions. I pointed out that several other homeowners in the community had frequent visitors, including one board member who hosted a weekly poker game that brought in a dozen cars every Thursday night. Then Ross spoke up. "I have known Deborah for 15 years, he said, "and I have watched her do this exact same thing to multiple people in multiple places. She finds someone she does not like, and she uses whatever power she has to make their life miserable. This is not about HOA rules. This is about Deborah being a bully." "How dare you?" Deborah stood up, her face red. "You have no right to be here attacking my character." "I am not attacking your character," Ross said. "I am describing your behavior. There is a difference." Gary tried to restore order. "Okay, everyone calm down. Let us focus on the actual violation." "There is no violation," I said. "I am not running a business. I am living in my house and occasionally having friends visit. That is not illegal." Patricia, the older board member, spoke up. "But Deborah has photos of multiple vehicles at your house over several weeks. That seems like evidence of business activity." "Did she also take photos of the poker game at Bob's house?" I asked, naming the board member who hosted the weekly game. "Or the book club that meets at Jennifer's house twice a month? Or the kids' birthday parties that happen every other weekend on this street? Having visitors is not a business." The board deliberated again. This time, when they came back, Gary looked even more uncomfortable. "We have decided to table this violation pending further investigation," he said. "Xavier, you are not fined at this time, but we will be monitoring the situation." It was not a complete victory, but it was better than another $1,000 fine. Deborah was livid. As everyone filed out of the community center, she cornered me in the parking lot. "You think you are so smart bringing Ross into this," she hissed, "but you have no idea what I am capable of." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It is a promise," she said. "I will find a way to get you out of this neighborhood." Ross, who had been walking to his truck, heard this and came back over. "Deborah, I would be very careful about what you say right now," he said. "Threatening someone is not a good look, especially when there are witnesses." Deborah glared at both of us and then stormed off to her Lexus. Things escalated quickly after that. Deborah started calling code enforcement on me weekly. Someone would show up to inspect my property for various alleged violations. Overgrown weeds. My yard was perfectly maintained. Trash bins left out past pickup time. They were not. Excessive noise. I barely made any noise. Every inspection found nothing wrong, but it was exhausting and disruptive. She also ramped up her campaign against me within the neighborhood. She sent emails to the entire HOA distribution list, claiming that my business was lowering property values and creating safety hazards. Most people ignored her, but a few took her side, either because they believed her or because they did not want to become her next target. My lawyer, Michelle Torres, told me I had grounds for a harassment lawsuit, but it would still be expensive and time-consuming. Then Deborah made her critical mistake. It was a Saturday afternoon in early October. The weather had finally cooled down enough to be pleasant, and I was in my garage organizing parts when I heard shouting outside. I went out to find Deborah standing in my driveway, holding a clipboard and taking photos. "What are you doing on my property?" I asked. "I am conducting an inspection as vice president of the HOA," she said. "We received a complaint about hazardous materials being stored improperly." "You need permission to enter private property," I said. "You do not have my permission." "I do not need your permission," Deborah said. "The HOA covenants give the board the right to inspect properties for violations." "No, they do not," I said. I had read the covenants thoroughly by this point. "They give you the right to view the property from the street or common areas. You cannot enter my driveway or yard without permission." "I will do what I need to do to protect this community," Deborah said, continuing to take photos. "You need to leave," I said firmly. "Now. Or what?" Deborah said, getting in my face. "You will call the police. Go ahead. They will side with the HOA." That was when she made her second mistake. She tried to go around me to take photos of the inside of my garage. When I stepped in front of her to block her path, she shoved me. It was not a hard shove, but it was enough to make me stumble back a step, and it was assault. "That was a mistake," I said quietly. "Oh, please," Deborah said. "You are going to cry assault because I barely touched you. Grow up." But I had my phone out, and I had been recording video since she refused to leave. I had the whole thing on camera. I called the Phoenix Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. An officer arrived within 20 minutes. It was Officer Martinez again, and he looked like he was getting tired of being called to my neighborhood. I showed him the video. He watched it twice, then looked at Deborah. "Madam, you were trespassing on private property and you committed assault. I am going to need you to come with me." Deborah's face went white. "Assault? I barely touched him." "Any unwanted physical contact is assault under Arizona law," Officer Martinez said, "and we have it on video." "This is ridiculous," Deborah said. "I am the victim here. He has been harassing the HOA for months." "Madam, please turn around and put your hands behind your back," Officer Martinez said. I watched as he handcuffed Deborah and put her in the back of his patrol car. Several neighbors had come out to see what was happening, and I could see the shock on their faces. Deborah Klein, the vice president of the HOA, the woman who had been terrorizing me for weeks, was being arrested in front of everyone. After Deborah was taken away, Officer Martinez took my full statement. He also noted all the previous calls to my address, the harassment complaints, and the pattern of behavior. He gave me a case number and told me I could file a restraining order if I wanted. Ross called me an hour later. Apparently, word had already spread through some mutual acquaintance. "I heard Deborah got arrested," he said. "What happened?" I explained everything, including the video evidence. Ross was quiet for a moment, then said, "She never learns. She always thinks she is above the rules." "What happens now?" I asked. "Well, she will probably be charged with misdemeanor assault and trespassing," Ross said. Depending on the prosecutor and whether you press charges, she could face fines, probation, maybe even a few days in jail if she has priors. Does she have priors? Not criminal ones, Ross said. But she has been sued in civil court twice. Once by a former neighbor and once by a coworker, both times for harassment. She settled both cases. This painted a clear picture. Deborah was someone who had been getting away with this behavior for years, and it had finally caught up with her. The HOA board held an emergency meeting the following week. Gary called me personally to let me know they were removing Deborah from her position as vice president and rescinding all the violation notices she had issued against me. We did not realize how far out of line she had gotten, Gary said. Several other homeowners have come forward with complaints about her behavior too. We are very sorry for what you have been through. I appreciate that, I said. But I want it in writing that my container is approved and that I will not face any further violations related to my business. Absolutely, Gary said. We will send you an official letter confirming everything. True to his word, I received that letter 3 days later. It explicitly stated that my storage container was approved, my home-based business was compliant with all HOA rules, and all previous fines were voided. I also filed for a restraining order against Deborah. With the video evidence, the police reports and testimony from Ross and several neighbors about her harassment campaign, the judge granted it without hesitation. Deborah was ordered to stay at least 300 feet away from me and my property. The criminal case moved slowly, as these things do. Deborah hired a lawyer who tried to get the charges dismissed, but the video evidence was too clear. In January, she pleaded no contest to misdemeanor assault and trespassing. She received probation, community service, and a fine. She also had to attend anger management classes, but the most satisfying outcome was what happened in the neighborhood. Once Deborah was removed from power, several other homeowners came forward with their own stories about her harassment. It turned out I was not the first person she had targeted. There was a single mother she had tried to evict because she had a home daycare. There was a retired veteran she had fined repeatedly because his lawn was not green enough. There was a young couple she had reported to immigration services because they spoke Spanish at home. They were both born in Arizona. The HOA board instituted new policies to prevent this kind of abuse in the future. They created an appeals process for violations, implemented term limits for board members, and required all violation notices to be reviewed by at least 3 board members before being issued. Deborah eventually moved out of Sunset Valley. I heard through Ross that she sold her house in March and moved to Tucson. I hoped the people in her new neighborhood would be ready for her, but that was not my problem anymore. Ross and I stayed in touch. He even helped me move some heavy equipment when I expanded my business a few months later. His daughter, who had reconnected with him after cutting ties with her mother, started helping me with bookkeeping for my business. It turned out she was studying accounting at Arizona State University. My business continued to grow. The storage container that had started this whole mess was working out perfectly. I painted it to match my fence as promised, and it was completely invisible from the street. I had more space to organize inventory, which meant I could take on bigger orders and expand my customer base. One afternoon in April, about 6 months after everything had settled down, I was working in my garage when Ross stopped by with his tow truck. He had just finished a job in the area and wanted to check in. "How is business?" he asked. "Really good," I said. "I just landed a contract with a restoration shop in Flagstaff. They are going to buy parts from me regularly." "That is great," Ross said. "You know, if Deborah had just left you alone, none of this would have happened." "True," I said. But I learned a lot from this whole experience. I learned about HOA law, about standing up for myself, and about the importance of documentation. And you learned that sometimes the tow truck driver is your best ally, Ross said with a grin. Definitely that, I agreed. We stood there for a moment, looking out at the quiet suburban street. The Arizona sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was peaceful, finally. You know what the funny thing is, Ross said. Deborah always thought she was protecting the neighborhood from people like you, people who did not fit her perfect vision, but you were never the problem. You were just living your life, working hard, following the rules. She was the one who made everything toxic. Some people need an enemy, I said. She picked the wrong one. Ross laughed. That she did. He left shortly after, and I went back to work. As I organized parts and updated my inventory spreadsheet, I thought about how close I had come to giving up. If I had not documented everything, if Ross had not reached out, if I had not stood my ground, Deborah would have won. She would have forced me to move or shut down my business, and she would have moved on to her next victim. But I had stood firm. I had followed the law, gathered evidence, and refused to be bullied. And in the end, justice had prevailed. Living in an HOA is complicated. There are rules and regulations, and sometimes they serve a legitimate purpose. But when people like Deborah use those rules as weapons, when they abuse their power to settle personal grudges or enforce their own vision of how everyone should live, the system breaks down. I was lucky. I had resources, evidence, and an unexpected ally. But I know not everyone in my situation would have those advantages. Some people would have just paid the fines, removed the container, and tried to keep their heads down. And Deborah would have claimed another victim. The restraining order was still in effect, and I had not seen Deborah since that day she was arrested. I occasionally wondered if she had learned anything from the experience, if she had any moment of self-reflection, where she realized how much damage she had caused. But based on what Ross had told me about her history, I doubted it. Some people never change. My lawyer, Michelle Torres, told me that HOA abuse cases were becoming more common across Arizona. She said that as HOAs gained more power and homeowners became more aware of their rights, these conflicts were inevitable. She encouraged me to share my story, to help other people understand that they did not have to accept harassment from their HOA boards. I started posting about my experience on local community forums and social media. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people reached out with their own HOA horror stories. Some were fighting battles similar to mine. Others had already lost their homes or their businesses because they could not afford to fight back. It made me realize how important it is to document everything, to know your rights, and to stand up against abuse of power. It also made me appreciate how lucky I was to have people like Ross and Michelle in my corner. By summer, my business had grown enough that I hired my first employee, a young guy named Tyler who was passionate about vintage cars and needed a job while he finished his degree at community college. He was amazed when I told him about the HOA battle. "So this whole business almost got shut down because some lady did not like you?" he asked. "Pretty much," I said. "She used her position to try to force me out." "That is crazy," Tyler said. "What kind of person does that?" "Someone who thinks they are entitled to control other people's lives," I said. But the good news is, she did not win. Teaching Tyler, the business gave me a new perspective on everything I had been through. When you are in the middle of a crisis, it is hard to see the bigger picture. But looking back, I could see how much I had learned and how much stronger I had become. The Sunset Valley HOA continued under new leadership. Gary remained as president, but they elected a new vice president, A reasonable woman named Sandra who worked as a teacher and had no interest in power trips. The neighborhood became more peaceful, more like what an HOA is supposed to be, about maintaining common areas, enforcing reasonable standards, and building community. I even joined the Architectural Review Committee, the group that approved requests like my storage container. I wanted to make sure that future homeowners would not face the same arbitrary denials and harassment that I had experienced. We streamlined the approval process, created clear guidelines, and established a principle that if something was allowed under city code and was not causing legitimate problems for neighbors, it should be approved. Ross continued to work for Phoenix Towing, and he became something of a local legend in our neighborhood. Whenever someone had a problem with an illegally parked car or needed help with a vehicle issue, they called Ross. He was reliable, fair, and after the incident with Deborah, everyone knew he was not afraid to stand up to bullies. His daughter, Emma, graduated with her accounting degree and started her own bookkeeping business. I was one of her first clients, and she helped me organize my finances in a way that made tax season much less stressful. She told me that watching her father stand up to her mother had inspired her to be more assertive in her own life. My mom spent years making everyone feel small, Emma told me one day when she was working on my quarterly reports. Seeing her finally face consequences for her actions was the best thing that could have happened, not just for you and my dad, but for me too. It showed me that bullies do not always win. By the fall, almost a full year after the container delivery incident that started everything, I had a thriving business, a peaceful home life, and good relationships with my neighbors. The storage container was still in my side yard, still painted to match my fence, still completely compliant with all rules and regulations. Every time I looked at it, I remembered what I had overcome to keep it there. One October evening, I was closing up the garage when a car pulled up in front of my house. A woman I did not recognize got out and walked up my driveway. "Xavier Zimmerman?" she asked. "That is me," I said cautiously. "My name is Jennifer, and I live over in the Palmdale HOA about 10 miles from here," she said. "I heard about what happened with your HOA, and I am dealing with something similar. I was hoping you could give me some advice." We talked for over an hour. Her situation was different in the details but similar in spirit. Her HOA president was trying to force her to remove a solar panel installation that had been properly approved and installed. The HOA was claiming it was not aesthetically appropriate, despite Arizona state law protecting homeowners' rights to install solar panels. I gave her Michelle Torres's contact information and shared everything I had learned about documentation, persistence, and standing up for your rights. I also told her about the importance of finding allies and not being afraid to make the conflict public when necessary. "The thing about bullies," I said, "is they rely on their victims being isolated and afraid. Once you shine a light on what they are doing, once you get other people involved, their power disappears." Jennifer thanked me and left with a new sense of determination. A few months later, she emailed me to say that she had won her battle. Her HOA had backed down after she threatened legal action and made the issue public at a board meeting. These small victories meant something. They were not just about individual homeowners keeping their solar panels or storage containers. They were about pushing back against petty tyranny, about defending the principle that people have the right to live in their own homes without arbitrary harassment. I never forgot what it felt like to see those orange cones blocking my driveway that October morning. The anger, the frustration, the sense of helplessness when someone with authority over you decides to make your life difficult for no good reason. But I also never forgot what it felt like to stand my ground, to fight back with evidence and allies, and to win. The restraining order against Deborah was set to expire after 2 years, but I never heard from her again. Ross occasionally got updates through mutual acquaintances, and the word was that she had tried to pull similar stunts in her new HOA in Tucson, but people there had already heard about her reputation and were not having it. She eventually resigned from that HOA board too. My business continued to flourish. By the following spring, I had expanded to the point where I needed to rent additional warehouse space in an industrial area of Phoenix. The storage container in my yard became just the beginning of a larger operation. I was able to hire 3 more employees and started shipping parts all over the country. One of my best customers was actually a guy named Robert who lived in Sunset Valley, just 5 streets over from me. He was restoring a 1967 Mustang and needed a lot of specialized parts. We became friends through our business dealings, and he told me that he had witnessed some of my conflicts with Deborah. I wanted to say something at the time, Robert admitted. But honestly, I was afraid of becoming her next target. I saw what she was doing to you, and I just kept my head down. I am sorry about that. I understand, I said. She created an atmosphere of fear. That is how bullies operate. Well, I am glad you stood up to her, Robert said. Things are a lot better around here now. That seemed to be the consensus. The neighborhood had transformed from a place where people were afraid to step out of line into a more relaxed community, where people actually talked to each other and helped each other out. The new HOA board was focused on actual community building rather than enforcing petty rules. They organized neighborhood barbecues, created a community garden, and even started a tool lending library where people could borrow equipment they only needed occasionally. It was the kind of place I had hoped to live in when I first moved to Sunset Valley. On a warm Saturday in May, about 18 months after the whole ordeal began, the neighborhood held its annual spring festival. I set up a booth about vintage car restoration and talked to people about my business. Ross came with Emma, and we all hung out together, eating barbecue and enjoying the Arizona sunshine. Gary, the HOA president, came over to talk to me. Xavier, I want to thank you again for your patience during that whole mess with Deborah, he said. And I want to apologize for not stepping in sooner. I should have seen what was happening and put a stop to it. You are doing better now, I said. That is what matters. We have learned a lot, Gary said. And we have actually used your case as an example in HOA training sessions about what not to do. You would be surprised how common this kind of abuse is. Unfortunately, I would not be surprised at all, I said. As the sun set that evening and the festival wound down, I looked around at my neighbors laughing and talking, at the kids playing in the park, at the sense of community that had finally developed. This was what an HOA was supposed to be about. Not control and harassment, but working together to make a neighborhood better for everyone. Ross came over as I was packing up my booth. You know, when I first heard about what Deborah was doing to you, I almost did not get involved, he said. I thought maybe I should just stay out of it, not make things weird with my ex-wife. What changed your mind? I asked. I realized that staying silent makes you complicit, Ross said. I had seen Deborah hurt too many people, and I had always told myself it was not my problem. But it was my problem. She was my ex-wife, and I knew exactly what she was capable of. If I had information that could help you and I did not share it, that would make me part of the problem. Well, I am glad you reached out, I said. I do not think I would have gotten through it without your help. You would have figured it out, Ross said. You are tougher than you think, but maybe it would have taken longer and cost more money. We said our goodbyes, and I drove home as the Arizona sky turned from orange to purple to dark blue. My house looked peaceful in the evening light, with the storage container barely visible behind the fence, exactly where it was supposed to be. Inside, I fired up my computer and started working on orders. A customer in Michigan needed parts for a classic Corvette restoration. A shop in California wanted components for a vintage Camaro. My little business that Deborah had tried so hard to destroy was thriving. I thought about sending her a message, something petty about how I was doing better than ever despite her best efforts. But I did not. That would make me no better than her. Besides, my success was not about beating Deborah. It was about building something worthwhile, helping other car enthusiasts, and making a living doing something I loved. The legal system had handled Deborah appropriately. She had faced consequences for her actions. The HOA had implemented better policies. The neighborhood had improved. That was enough. As I worked late into the night, fulfilling orders and planning for future expansion, I reflected on everything I had learned. I had learned that documentation is critical when dealing with any bureaucracy or authority. I had learned that standing up for yourself is worth it, even when it is hard and expensive. I had learned that unexpected allies can come from surprising places. And I had learned that bullies eventually fall when enough people are willing to stand up to them. Most importantly, I had learned that home is not just a place you own. It is a place where you feel safe, where you can pursue your dreams, where you can live without fear of arbitrary punishment for doing nothing wrong. For a while, Deborah had taken that away from me. But I had fought to get it back, and now my house truly felt like home again. The storage container sat in my yard, weathered but solid, a symbol of everything I had overcome. It held parts worth tens of thousands of dollars, inventory that made my business possible. But more than that, it represented the principle that you do not have to accept abuse from people in power. You can fight back. You can win. And sometimes, if you are lucky, the tow truck driver is on your side.